You want leads to attract new customers, but not all leads are created equal. Our lead quantification platform evaluates and quantifies over 5 million leads and calls from hundreds of lead sources. We provide new leads through our marketplace and weigh the attributes and quality of leads at the granular level. We do the legwork, enabling you to focus your campaign budget on the leads that work. Leading advertisers across 20 industries have already benefited from our tools for maximizing ROI. With PX, you get the right leads at the right price every time.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Bas Offers, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at PX, the leading marketplace for acquiring new Medicare customers. I am super excited to dive in today with some of the most sophisticated Medicare agencies in the industry and share some of the learnings, how they've been running their customer acquisition campaigns during AEP. As a little introduction, we'll cover some of these topics. I'm not going to read them all out, but the biggest highlights would be to really share how some of the most sophisticated agencies today are actually acquiring customers in a new and different way, because this year's AEP is definitely different than previous years. The old way of actually buying new customers for Medicare was to get as many leads as possible, to submit as many applicants as possible, and don't worry about retention. Well, in 2023, everything is a bit of a different new way. Today, it's all about analyzing data, finding the most efficient cohorts, focus on LTV, and really put a spotlight on retention. So I'm really excited to talk about this. Besides the actual content we'll provide today, we actually stimulate everyone to shoot in questions or suggestions that you would love to have us bring up during the end of the webinar that I'll actually ask before we finalize, if there's sufficient time. So please do keep your questions coming, and you can actually use the Q&A button in your Zoom tools to do so. Quick introduction about PX. We are a customer acquisition platform focusing on many different verticals, but one of the bigger verticals that we focus on is Medicare. We have an embedded marketplace that reaches over 100 direct sources to acquire new customers. During this AEP, we expect to find about 15 to 20 million shoppers that are actually wanting to switch their policies. And this year, very big for us is also the ability to focus on retention campaigns, which we'll definitely dive into a little bit more today. But without further ado, I already introduced myself. I want to introduce both Mark and Michael. Mark DeSimone is CEO of Clearview Medicare, and Michael Page is Vice President at Carita. Mark, let's start with you. It would be great if you can do a quick introduction from your end, talk about your company and talk about your role in the company. You're still muted, Mark.
So thanks for that, Bas. So myself and my business partner started Clearview in 2021, really with a handful of agents, very small, startup. And fast forward to today, we've scaled to roughly 70 or so agents on the phone during AEP. Really have experienced all of the ups and downs that I'm sure many of you on the call have experienced, trying multiple different lead vendors, dealing with retention and effectuation, rapid disenrollment, you name it, we've gone through it. And yeah, I think that's the best way to describe the journey for sure. So
thanks for that. Mike, quick introduction from your end.
Thanks, and thanks, Bas, for having us on this call. Excited to talk about what we're doing in Medicare and kind of where we see the industry going. So Michael Page, I've been in the Medicare Advantage space for a little over 10 years now on the marketing side at Transact, Easy Insurance, then Spring Venture Group, and then came here to Carita Insurance to start their marketing side. We have about 25 agents that work on our own line of business, and then about another 75 that operate as a downline. of TZ Insurance. Selling almost exclusively Medicare Advantage. We've sold, with dedicated groups with Medicare Supplement. Also explored, other supplemental products for those agents as well. And as Mark said, doing all the same types of testing and pain points around retention and rapid disenrollments and dealing with the new CMS regulations and the ever-changing landscape. But excited to talk about all those things today.
Awesome. And Mike, before we jump in, I'm very curious with your experience working at Transact, then Spring Venture, and now at Carita, what a little bit the differences have been in the different type of organizations and how you've seen these organizations deal with Medicare customer acquisitions in different ways as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, here at Carita, we're a small and nimble organization, only having a handful of agents, but, our parent organization sells business to business, selling kind of janitorial supplies, general contractor supplies, construction, things like that, but had a lot of experience in telephonic sales. And so decided to give it a go at Medicare. And now 3 years later, like I said, we're at 100+ agents. And so the sales side is very good. We've got agents that have been here and with the overall organization for 15+ years. So our sales side is very neat and buttoned up, but the operational side is always a work in progress. But because of that, we're able to pivot, implement new strategies, kind of go with wherever we feel that the best fit or opportunity is very quickly, versus at kind of a large organization like a Transact where there's a lot of different layers of decision makers. Like at a Transact where most of the marketing and the lead generation relies on using the brands and the carrier relationships. So you have a very large marketing department. It's very segmented. Every person's responsible for one dedicated thing. So much more specialty versus general specialties. And then at, like a Spring Venture group where it's much more data focused and allowing kind of the data scientists to run the show and determine the kind of the lead flow and what leads should go to what agents. There's all different ways of doing it. I don't want to say one's better than the other. I would say, I find it more fun being in a little bit of a smaller organization where you can be in charge of the idea, implementation, and then evaluating the success to then see if it can scale. You've got a lot more control over the outcomes. And like I said, there's a lot less layers of kind of bureaucracy to go through. So yeah, those are kind of some of the differences that I've seen. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, but we all have their niche, and everybody seems to be doing well. So
awesome. Mark, before we jump in with actually some quotes that I'm going to share to talk about a particular topics that we want to uncover today. Can you talk a little bit more about your organization as well? Which carriers you guys write for? Are all your agents actually in-house and in the same spot, or how do you guys run the operations today?
Yeah, so we write for all the major carriers and a handful of regional carriers as well. Virtually all the relationships are direct, which I think is a little different than most agencies our size. So we have a lot of, I'll call it good and bad from the carriers. So, good things in terms of the communication with them. There's no middleman. I just go directly and ask questions about reporting, retention, et cetera. But you're also under, a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of compliance requirements that, an FMO or a middleman is going to kind of handle for you if you're a downline. Not in our case. So there's a, pretty good line of sight there. And I think the second piece of that was the agents are completely remote, which is something that personally I wasn't a huge fan of. We didn't have much of a choice at the time. And we just ended up scaling in a certain, really 3 or 4 major states. And we can't exactly bring them back. But we are looking at building out an office for the future and scaling that way as opposed to remote, just due to the efficiencies that we've seen. So
thanks for that. So let's start jumping in actually with the first quote. Obviously, we have to start with this one, guys. AEP has been a lot of fun so far, and I think the so far is an important little disclaimer here. Mark, I'm curious about you. How has AEP been so far, and what are some of the learnings after being live for over a week today?
Yeah, well, AEP, I don't know who wrote that quote, but it's definitely it's a challenge. It is fun in some ways, I think, because there's a lot of activity going on as opposed to other parts throughout the year. There's probably many people on this that are listening here that are writing Medicare all year long, and then there's some that change products mid-year. In our case, we write it all year long, and you see your agent sales per day average start to drop a bit because of eligibility requirements, et cetera, throughout the year. But during AEP, it's just let's see how many we can get, and let's really maximize efficiencies, et cetera. So I think it's going great, and for us at least, it is. We've got a lot of new marketing channels that obviously we're going to talk about later on. But I'm pretty satisfied with how it's going.
Awesome. And Mike, how's it been so far?
So far, so good. I mean, you're always hesitant to say that because you're always waiting for the first emergency, the first disaster with a technology or with the lead flow being completely cut off. But I mean, so far, we've seen consistent lead flow. We've had to change up some of the things that we're doing this year versus years past with some of the new rules, some of the uncertainty around the scope of appointment and the 48-hour time period. So we're relying more on consumer-initiated inbounds. So some new channels in the mix for us, but from sources that we're very comfortable with, as well as the help of the PX platform, as well as our partners over there, our team over there that we work with, which is making it much easier to proactively monitor when we think we're going to have downtime, and we think we're going to have to adjust bids, and when we might have more agents available, to kind of get on top of things that in the past might have been a bit more difficult. So far so good, and let's see how long that lasts.
Very good. So let's talk about something you just mentioned, which is actually the 48-hour rule, which I think has been on top of everyone's minds prior to going into AEP, with the CMS actually making some changes this year in terms of the guidelines and the regulations, how campaigns can be run. Obviously, many people expected a lot of changes. Before I ask you guys, that I'm curious how it's been impacted your company and how you actually think it's impacting the industry. I wanted to share this stat that is coming from the State of the Industry, which is an annual survey that we conduct as the title sponsor at LeadsCon, which shows that compliance is obviously more top of mind than ever before. And 63% of the companies that we surveyed that are brands today are heavily investing in further compliance and making sure that they can keep up, because outside of CMS, obviously, there's a lot of other changes that are there to keep up with. But let's talk about the 48-hour rule. Mark, have you changed the strategy in terms of the ways how you went into AEP to generate new customers?
Yeah. So as Mike said, we've made a shift to consumer-initiated inbounds, which I think isn't a surprise to a lot of people. But we're also generating transfers effectively internally through a couple different verticals that we believe to at least be compliant, that we've got sign off for a few carriers. So absolutely things have changed. But I would say in general, if you're going back to the quote, which is really these changes are positive in some ways, I think it really is separating the groups that want to be in Medicare and want to comply, versus the other side, which is kind of, hey, let me go, it's AEP, let's go sell, let's go get some leads, from, God knows where, and sell as much as we can and not worry about retention and see what sticks, right? So I think compliance, why a lot of your, why a lot of that survey kind of said we're investing in compliance is because it all comes back to LTV at the end of the day, and making sure that your clients are happy. And if agents aren't being compliant and not following CMS guidelines or what have you, then traditionally, at least in my opinion, your retention and your LTV is not going to be very good, which your business is going to hurt, your valuation is going to hurt, and it's not going to produce, I guess, the desired outcome for a lot of these groups.
Have you gotten a lot of directions and clear directions from your carrier partners how to navigate the 48-hour rule, and actually if it would be enforced as well?
Well, what I'll say on that is we've definitely gotten some different direction for sure. So there's a little bit of, I guess, not really miscommunication, but lack of, I guess, a clear path forward. Some have made it abundantly clear, others haven't. And I think CMS has kind of left a lot of doors open of how to comply and what's enforceable and what's not. So I think, I would be interested to see how this kind of plays out, for next year, and whether or not there's real enforcement by CMS, just because I know a lot of people are trying to comply, and it's kind of unknown whether or not it is, in fact, compliant based on their rule, in my opinion.
Mike, curious for your opinion.
Yeah, so I'll echo a lot of those thoughts. And so, we changed a lot of our strategy going into AEP. We actually have an in-house team that generates transfers for our licensed agents. And we had to move them off of that program and train them up on retention and get them doing retention dialing, just because we weren't comfortable with having them do the outbound dialing. I mean, we put in place processes to collect the scope of appointment and then dial it back 48 hours later. And what we've seen in the limited testing that we've done is that maybe you get 25% of the people back on the phone that indicate that they want to call back after you collect that scope of appointment. So, these are customers that said they wanted to talk to somebody, an agent, about a new Medicare plan, but you're telling them that you have to call them back 48 hours later, and then they're never picking up the phone again when you call them back. So, I don't necessarily know what good that's doing the consumer, but that's the rule that we have to comply with right now. So that's what we're doing. And we'll see what happens post AEP, if they reevaluate that or not. But for right now, we're having every contact we have with a customer, we're collecting, documenting that scope of appointment, whether it's an existing customer, a prospective customer, and warehousing that SOA separate from every other record, so that way we can quickly pull it if we need to. And since under the rule, the SOA is good for 12 months to call that customer back. At that point, if we build up enough data on SOAs from people that aren't interested or didn't qualify at the time, then maybe we'll have something to put together a transfer campaign in the future. But for right now, with the uncertainty, we're just going to rely on consumer-initiated inbounds.
Do you think, I heard it a little bit between the lines already, but do you think it's actually helping the industry as a whole to actually clean up some of the bad actors that had a bit of a bigger impact the last couple of years as well? And if not, do you actually think there's better alternatives than a 48-hour rule that you would like to see deployed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's helping consumers. I know that it's going to get people out of the space that are perhaps abusing lists, but there's other regulations that could do that as well. If you want to go out after people that were just robo dialing or doing other abusive tactics, this is the case of you've got somebody on the phone that says that they are interested in talking to an agent about a plan, and you're telling them you can't help them for 2 days, and then they fall off the track. So again, I don't think that's helping them. To really, I think, clean up this space, I think the best thing to do would be to limit how many times somebody can switch plans, and then you're essentially taking away the incentive to continually contact these customers. Because as it is right now, and we see it, and we've limited our agents' ability to switch people out of plans if they've already switched multiple times in a year. But before we did that, we were seeing people that would switch plans 7, 8 more times than that in a year. They were just switching every months. And as long as people can do that, there's going to be the incentive to continue to sell to those people, to continue to market to those people. And it's going to be an issue. And until that gets cleaned up, you know, all these other rules maybe will do something around the edges, but they're not going to be the end all be all and the cure for the bigger issues.
What's the maximum amount of switches that Corrida is applying, and what's the actual effect of doing so that you're seeing, which is obviously pretty early on at this stage, but can you share any of the results on that?
Sure, yeah. So every time we receive an inbound call and it gets to the point where our agent is doing a marks lookup, they have to mark in our CRM essentially how many times that person has switched plans, and they're allowed to sell that person a new plan if the number is 0 to 3. If it's over 3, they have to get a sales manager approval for it, and that happens. It gets granted very rarely. What we've seen is once it gets to 3 switches, the chances of that policy sticking are very low. So we really try to encourage them not to sell those. You know, we really want them to be selling people that have had 0 switches to 1 switch. You know, because if it's 1 switch, maybe they got put into a bad plan by somebody else, and you have a better plan for them. So okay, even 2 switches, you know, maybe they legitimately had a change of circumstance, or they had a bad plan, got changed into another plan. Who knows, right? There could be reasons for it. But once you get to 3 switches, I mean, you're essentially now you're switching them every quarter. And I mean, it gets to too many times. And then you get into, you know, that's again, every 3 to 4 months they're switching. The chance of that becoming a rapid disenrollment are pretty high. So you really don't want them selling that person.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let's switch gears a little bit and think about all the marketing tactics that you guys are applying today to generate activity within your call centers. And what I want to talk about is a little bit the decision that both of you have been taking this year to centralize your customer acquisition activities. Fun stat that also came out of the state of the industry this year is that companies and brands that focus on centralizing all their vendors into one platform and have the ability to proactively manage campaigns, meaning making real-time changes, have a 20% or higher positive impact on ROI. Can you both share, and I'll start with you, Mark, can you both share what you're doing today and perhaps how we're working together from a PX point of view together with your organization, and how that's helped going into this year's activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we're a smaller organization, and we don't have a giant marketing team that's able to do all the things that a giant marketing team does. So for us, centralizing things with PX and tapping into their marketplace specifically has really helped with pieces of agent availability, keeping agents, keeping them busy during specific times of the day that, we may not have a lot of volume coming in, and we've got a backstop in PX centralized, an account rep that, really knows what they're doing, as opposed to, kind of dealing piecemeal with all these various different vendors and partners. And, you're making, 10 phone calls if you want a diverse, group of vendors, as you should. The next thing you know, you've got, 1 or 2 people internally that are making all those phone calls, versus it's all centralized in a platform. There's a lot of data there that helps you make a lot of decisions, and it's all centralized. So very easy to come to those conclusions, kind of pivot quickly. that's probably where a lot of the ROI is coming from. If I had to guess, boss, is the ability to kind of make changes fast without a big team. Yeah, that's how we're working together today. And it's been great so far.
Mike?
Yeah, I would say very similar, right? So we have two people on our marketing team, so managing a large group of affiliates and publishers, is difficult. So we have a few direct relationships, and even those run through the PX platform, and then we leverage the marketplace for other partners who, again, right, that we could have a direct relationship with, but having PX as that in between takes away some of that management responsibility, where we have to work with them on truing up numbers at the end of the month, working with them on managing volume, looking at performance numbers, right? Having that all in one place takes that role off of our team's plate and puts it into the PX platform. And then having all those numbers in one reporting interface where we can look at, how our private partners are doing with the partners that are flowing through the marketplace, and just see one consolidated view to then roll it up by state, by hour, by agent. We're sending agent data in as well, and be able to then just pivot and make decisions with one unified view of our data. Just makes things a lot easier, and sometimes lets us know that we're making the right informed decisions.
Well, both of your organizations are obviously heavily focused on data. I would say that my experience so far has been that both of you have been able to actually provide rich data to enhance campaigns within PX and to really get the learnings out of it and extract it in the best possible way. Before we go a little bit to the tactics and the proactive changes, I wanted to come back to Mark, what you said about the agent availability. And historically, this has been a big challenge for many of the agencies and carriers to keep agents at all times as much as possible on the phone, not to have any dropped calls or consumers that are waiting in queue. Can you talk a little bit about how this works today? How are you doing this? And how you're actually making sure that the agents stay busy?
Yeah. So I would say that, aside from, if you take all of our lead vendors and you prioritize the ones that we perform best with, we want to make sure that those calls land 100% of the time. And that if those calls, or when, frankly, those vendors have a blip or they have a slow period of time, that there's still sufficient volume, in the call center. And for us, that's really where our agent availability comes in. You can set it at one agent, you can set it at 3, you can set it at 4. We have different ones based on, which vendors we really want to prioritize based on performance. And that's how we keep everybody busy all the time. It's constantly checking to see if there's availability, if vendor number one that's performing the best for us has, a lot of people on the phone and it isn't sending a call, and there's more than 3 people available, then vendor number 2 comes in and they're able to fill the call, and, so forth. So that's how we use agent availability. And it's obviously, in terms of dropped calls, a total game changer. You're effectively dropping nothing. And if you do it right and you can kind of get a feel for which partners are going to kind of perform in terms of volume, and which one you want to prioritize, and you can really dial it in and have a great setup.
And Mike, I know that the agent availability API of Creata is actually looking at state level availability as well. Can you talk how that actually works and how that's incorporated together within PX to ensure that it's even being done on a state level?
Yeah, so the API that we use, and again, it can use more than even how we're using it now, and it's one of the things that we're looking at is expanding it. But right now we segment it by the campaigns that we have our agents on, and when a call comes in, we also pen the state, because our agents don't have a uniform state licensing profile. So we could have agents licensed in 18 states and agents licensed in 5 states. And a call comes in, it gets routed based on the area code. And if the agent that's available is not licensed in that state, we could potentially show agent available, but then the call comes in and gets dropped. So what we do with our agent availability API is we append the campaign ID, so that we only return the agents that are on that campaign, and then we also append the state. So then to take it one step further, we only return the agents that are licensed in that state, to really try to nail down if there's actually an agent available or not. And then, there's some other things that we're looking at trying to do. So like we could append actual agent names into that API. So we have some publishers and partners in the exchange that perform, significantly higher than others, but have much less volume. So we're looking at setting up campaigns where, if our top 1 or 2 agents are available, we return a significantly higher bid to get some of those lower volume but much higher performing partners. And then again, right, we can see how long an agent has been waiting or how long agents have been waiting for a call. So we're also looking at putting in place logic that says, if agents have been waiting 1 to 2 minutes, increase the bid by 5%, 2 to 3 minutes, increase the bid by 15%, until that time is again back to 0 agents waiting. So right now, our average time between calls is 30 to 60 seconds. It gets a little bit higher at night. But one of the other advantages of working with PX and their team is that their development team built out essentially a Google Sheet that has our API in the background and updates every 5 minutes with how many agents we have on the phones and then how many agents are available. So our account manager can proactively monitor in 5-minute increments how many agents we have total that are dialing to help proactively manage the volume. And then if we have agents available over a period of time, can go in and manage the bids for us. Since we've given him direction that, certain times a day we tend to see that wait time creep up, like after 6, 7 o'clock, and that if necessary, ramp up the bids so that we can bring those calls in. So if he starts to see agents waiting, he can go in there and do that for us.
Let's talk a little bit about the dynamic bidding that you're talking about a little bit more in depth, because one of my favorite topics and one of my favorite product features within PX to really utilize the not only the agent availability API to get calls in or get leads in when you want them, but also to really have a more agile and sophisticated way of actually determining what you're paying for a lead or a call for that matter. So many companies today still have fixed pricing for leads or calls that they're deploying to all their partners. Maybe is that sophisticated as having 2 tiers. What we see at PX is that brands that use dynamic bidding, and when we're talking about dynamic bidding, it's indeed day parting rules, sourcing rules, state, geographic location rules. Companies that use dynamic bidding are 35% more effective versus the competition. Mark, I'm curious about your thoughts on this in particular, and knowing that you centralize all the data back into PX to have those decisions in there as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you're doing this, and for example, on a source level, how you're pricing your source in a different way today?
Yeah, so I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, the data kind of speaks for itself. So who to prioritize, who not to prioritize. And you can also, I think another piece of the dynamic bidding is, if the market's soft or if it's, if there's tons of volume and demand is a bit lower, then there's, you can see that within the marketplace and within PX, and you can make decisions based on that in terms of pricing, whether that be higher or lower during certain times. As Mike described, at night for him, it gets a little slower. He can decide to raise the bid at that point. Or, in the morning for us, we've had a little bit of trouble in the morning, kind of getting things going. Same sort of thing. So obviously that ability and having everything centralized, seeing the data, you've got a pulse on the market, which is really valuable. I know the first day or so, or really I'd say the third day of AEP, I called you, boss, and I was like, what's going on here? And you effectively said, hold on 1 second. And next thing you know, you effectively have a pulse on the market, and boom, you have, a bunch of volume coming in, and we'll see how that continues to play out. But obviously demand was very high in the, early, first week. And I think, throughout AEP, it's a huge advantage to kind of understand where that's going to land in real time. So that's what I'd say on the dynamic piece of it.
Awesome. And without sharing any of your cost per sale metrics, I'm curious how you're thinking about your diversification of the mix of sources that you're working with today. Because if there's actually more sources and there's an oversupply on the amount of calls and leads that are available, you could maybe beat the goals you set prior to AEP. Mike, how are you thinking about that as a goal by itself? Should that be a goal by itself to really diversify your source mix, or has it been not so important and everything is just based on cost per sale metrics at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything needs to be hedged. We always try to, I mean, again, right, we're only targeting, a few hundred calls per day. So, we could fill that theoretically from one partner if we wanted to. But then what happens if that partner goes down, has a problem with where they're generating leads from, decides that, they do a deal with a carrier where they can get $30 more per call than what they're selling to you. And, I mean, there's 100 different variables that could impact it. And so we always try to diversify as much as possible our mix so that, an impact from one source doesn't completely blow us out of the water, so that we always have, backups and a backup to the backup, to the point that, we're running our own internal volume through owned and operated sites as kind of a carve out from our tracked budget and performance, just so that way it's a source that we have, and it's a source that we can continue to grow and scale, so that it's something completely within our own control. Because again, you can never have enough diversification. And so, and then to the dynamic bidding on that, I think it's important to, bid, right size the bids as many ways as possible. But, there are certain sources or partners where sometimes it does make sense to just have a static bid, whether it's, somebody you've worked with for a really long time, and how they generate the leads, that they just need a consistent flat bid because they don't, like to sell dynamically, and the volume works, and, maybe you could get it a couple of dollars cheaper, but if it works, it works. And so, I mean, we value relationships above all else, especially with this space and how important compliance is, and how, you need to trust your partners. And so for us, if we have a partner that we can trust and work with really well, I mean, we'll sacrifice, a couple dollars on the back end to work with somebody that, we don't have to think about 24/7 of whether or not their stuff's compliant, and, whether we're going to get shut down tomorrow because of some call they sent us.
Awesome. And you're talking about if it's working well. Let's talk a little bit about, I know it's going to be your favorite topic, Mark, retention strategies, which has been on everyone's mind for the last 2 or 3 years, and thinking about how to do it differently going into AEP each time. Can you share a little bit, Mark, what some of your worries are and how you've tried to mitigate that with all the efforts you've been focusing on in terms of retention?
Yep. So, boss, kind of how I feel about this. There's a million different ways to, skin the cat and, handle this. Everybody's got their own strategy. They've got retention teams. They've got, text messages, emails. We send you a birthday card. We send you a direct mail. All of it, in my opinion, unless, maybe there's some people on the webinar that actually have figured it out. But we've seen, effectively the same results across testing all these kind of different channels. The number one thing we've seen that affects retention is how the agent handles the sale. And actually how the, quite literally how we call it buttoning up the sale. There's no question that when you look at the numbers and you see one agent's got 50%, effectuation and one's got 92%, there's no email, text, direct mail. There's nothing I can do there that's going to change. The one agent just isn't developing a relationship and isn't selling correctly. Aside from that, some things we are doing on the back end that we just started with you guys is we're effectively routing all the calls that we have already purchased back to our own retention agents. So if a lead vendor, sells us a call, we pay for it and we sell that person, or we don't. I believe that's how it works. As long as we paid for the call, it comes back to us and we're able to, effectively discuss plans with that person, see why they're shopping, if they just spoke to us, a couple of days ago, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way. Another way is really just monitoring the data. The key is understanding that the person is actually making a move. Many people are late to the party when it comes to seeing it happen in real time. And I know that's another thing that you guys are kind of rolling out is a retention campaign internally where effectively if the person is inside the marketplace shopping, who's already a customer, it notifies us, which is a really, something we're not using right now, but that we will be using in the future. And I think it'll certainly make an impact, in terms of identifying what you do from there. I think is, frankly, up to the operator. It's all about execution at the end of the day. But understanding and identifying that the moves are happening, that this person is a shopper, is the first piece of the puzzle that really is the most important, in my opinion.
So no silver bullet.
No, sir.
Can help us a silver bullet here for the audience. Mike, can you share a little bit what you've been doing within the campaigns today, and maybe even share some of the statistics, what you've seen coming out of it so far?
Yeah, so we're doing very similar, right? We have a dedicated retention team that is following up with our sales post sale, a day after, 2 days after, and essentially really trying to work that person from the time of sale to the effective date, and then trying to continue. And to echo what Mark said, that if the agent who initially spoke to them just didn't follow the right process, didn't kind of button up the right elements on that call, then it's going to be very difficult for the person to stay on the books. But that's actually one of the things that we're trying to get ahead of with our retention calls. So we have all former agents that are doing retention, and they almost do like a third-party verification on those calls, making sure that the person is aware of what they signed up for, that all their information is correct, that there weren't any misunderstandings on that call, and try to get ahead of any issues that would cause them to cancel. And then if they legitimately really just didn't want to sign up at that point, and there was a problem on the sales call that our agent just glossed over and put them into a plan, then we can take care of the disenrollment and getting them off of the plan before it escalates to a carrier complaint or a CMS complaint. So trying to stay ahead of those issues as much as possible. And so the other thing that we're doing is we are doing the retention callback campaign through PX, where we essentially have loaded our entire book of business, or our active customers, into the PX platform, and are monitoring those customers across the entire PX marketplace for both leads and calls, and seeing who from our active book of business is out there shopping for a new plan. And if we do identify somebody out there, we're placing a bid and trying to win that customer and then routing them to our retention team. And so far, early days from what we've seen is about 1% of our book of business we've identified in the market. So again, it's something that we're trying to stay on top of and identify those people before they switch, so that we can get in touch with them. And if they are going to switch, at least we can be the ones to help them switch plans before they speak with somebody else. And that's another big goal of what our retention touches are designed to do, is at least let them put the Carita name in their heads, so that if somebody else calls them, they know that they're already working with an agent, and that they can call us back to speak about whatever that person called them about, or any questions or concerns that they have about their plan. And that's a big thing that our team does, is they help them talk to the carrier, they help them set up doctor's appointments. What we've seen in research that we've done and research that we've looked at with other companies is that once a beneficiary or customer activates their plan, meaning they take advantage of at least one service, they're 25% more likely to stick with the plan. So if they schedule a dentist cleaning, a doctor's appointment, fill a prescription, anything, they're more likely to stick with that plan than the switch. And so that's really what we're trying to get them to do in those first 30 to 60 days, is just utilize something in the plan.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing it. And I think for yesterday, even the statistics that my team pinged me during the webinar about is that yesterday we saw close to 1%, even in market, on only one day of the portfolio of great adult shopping around that we're trying to protect and retain. Quick reminder from my end, while we're getting close to the end of this particular webinar, please shoot in your Q&A by pressing the button and sending your questions. We have a couple of questions coming in, so I just wanted to go through some of them. And Mark, I'll start with the first question that came in is, what do you do with new placements to prevent them from disenrolling? So after you actually acquired the policy, what do you do to really mitigate rapid disenrollment? And what's the silver bullet? I'm still looking for the silver bullet, Mark.
Yeah, me too. Really what Mike just said, we have a follow-up call within the first 24 to 48 hours to them. And he's spot on when he says the utilization of the benefits is really the key here. That's the same information that I have in terms of the percentage of the persistency and with using the actual benefits. So I think an initial follow-up, really, especially during AEP, getting out to your agents, the importance of developing a relationship, letting them know the time of the year and what's expected during this time of the year, how many people are going to be calling them, how much marketing they're going to see, be effectively human with this, with the consumer from an agent level. And then on the back end, all the things that Mike just discussed in terms of having a retention team, following up, utilizing, encouraging the utilization of benefits, all that stuff, however you want to do it on whatever cadence is kind of really the standard operating procedure at this point.
Thank you for that. And Mike, another question that came in, what challenges should marketeers anticipate when transitioning their campaigns to dynamic bidding, and how can they overcome this together with their partners?
So I would say that the biggest challenge is potentially volume, depending on how you have the campaign set up. But if you set expectations around what you need, and this is where having something like the agent availability API or something that can offset that, where if you say we need to have leads coming through, so the dynamic bidding is great, but put a multiplier in if we have agents waiting for X amount of time, or if we have 2 agents waiting, something like that, that can kind of hedge you against that. Because that when you're dynamically bidding, somebody's probably always going to be outbidding you, because there'll be people with static bids that will just come in at $65, $70 and beat whatever you have. So you, by definition, are going to get less volume. So, I would say the volume is always going to be the biggest issue. So making sure that you have something in place to hedge against that, or just monitor it to make sure that dynamic bidding is not completely undercutting all of the volume that, you potentially want.
Thanks for sharing that as well. Guys, I think we're getting close to the end of this webinar. We had a couple of questions that came in that are already answered by the team, or will be answered if they were directed directly to people here as well. I want to end with a question thinking about the remainder of AEP, what you're most excited about, and going to next year, what is the one thing that you wish would change going into 2024? It's a hard one. I'm going to put you on the spot on this one, Mark. What are your thoughts on those 2 questions?
So the first one, what am I excited about? Really just excited to see where the market goes for, the rest of AEP, what demand looks like, how people are performing, really what happened after AEP is what I'm really excited to see, whether it be good or bad. it'll at least, give me an idea of where the industry kind of is today, which I think a lot of people are really not sure of a lot of things right now, really a lot of uncertainty. What I would like, if I could pick anything, I'd get rid of AEP altogether. I think that would promote a lot of retention. I think it would certainly get a lot of people out of the space that are scaling up during this period of time, selling and then disappearing, and using, ways of getting leads in that are extremely cheap, non-compliant, and, they've really got nothing to lose by doing it. So I think that would definitely help a lot, removing AEP.
No more AEP. I think, Mike, I see you shaking yes.
Yeah, I'm most excited for December 8th. Yeah, that's what I'm excited for. But yeah, I mean, I'm, just to see what we can continue doing with just inbounds. And then once we get to January, to see how all of this business places and shakes out, to see with the shift to just consumer initiated, did that really make an impact or not? And then, if I could change one thing going into next year, besides, completely getting rid of AEP, it'd be like I said, I would get rid of all of the special enrollment periods, limit how often somebody can change plans or sign up for a new plan, and focus more on that side of the house than on the marketing side. Because as long as people can continue to essentially switch whenever they want, there's going to be no incentive for, even the most of the marketing now, 90% of it is clean, compliant marketing. And I mean, if you think about it, the biggest change over the last 2 years to clean up the space wasn't anything CMS did. It was when Google required everybody to register as essentially a compliant, as a health insurance entity, which knocked out most people. That cleaned up the space more than anything else. So if they went after how many times you could switch, it would take away a lot of the confusion and around a lot of the noise.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for sharing insights. I know what a busy period it is, so the fact that you guys took the time for today's webinar, and also with some of the prep work leading up to it, I really appreciate it. Good luck, and December 8th, mark it in your calendars. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today, and chat soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.